Hey Mama Can Do It fans, I'm Mary Kay and I'm here today to show you how to do a rise alteration on the Mama Can Do It women's spit pants. This will also work on the men's, the boys, the girls, the babies, actually any pants, skirt, or the skirt portion of a dress that you need to alter. The first thing that we need to do is define rise, and that will explain why I'm wearing this hilarious belt. Rise is the measurement from a front point. It would be your waist if it weren't defined, but this pattern says that it sits right below your belly button. So I have this about 1 inch below my belly button, but it's the distance from this point through your crotch to the same point in the back. So you'll take an elastic, tie it in a circle, and make sure that it's parallel to the ground. I think mine is. Yeah. Take your measuring tape, hold it at the front point, come through your legs, and measure it at the back point. That is 22¼ inches for me. So that's where I need to compare to my pattern. So let's go over to my work table and compare the pattern. Let's measure the rise on our front piece. I'm going to be using a modified yoga band that will be 2 inches in height. So I'm going to start with this yoga waistband line, and I'm going to measure there along the front curve. And I get 8½ inches. Plus 2 inches for the height of my waistband. That makes 10½ inches. Now let's measure the curve on the back piece. The rise on the back pattern piece was 14⅛ inch. So I took those numbers and I did some math. I'll explain what I did. I added the front and back rise on the pattern pieces to get a total actual rise of 24.625. I subtracted my rise from that, and then I took into account the seam allowance. When I sew the front and back together at the leg seam, the inner leg seam, I'm going to lose 3/8 inch off of each piece. That equates to losing a total of 3/4 inch. If this were the first time that I had made this pattern, I would stop right here and say that this is the total I need to subtract from the rise on the pattern pieces. I would divide this number by 2 and subtract that from the front and that same amount from the back for a total of 1.625. But I have made this pattern before, and I used a fabric that has a lot of vertical stretch. The fabric that I'm going to be using again has a lot of vertical stretch. So I took into account the alterations that I had made before. When I first made the pattern, I took out 1 inch just because I'm a short girl. That would be 1 inch from the front and 1 inch from the back. So I know that it's going to have to be something more than 2 inches, and this number is less than that. So I added 1 inch for yikes, that's not enough. Came up with 2.625. Divided that by 2 because I'm going to take half of it out of the front and half of it out of the back. Came up with 1 1/3 inch that I'll remove from the rise on the front piece and the back piece. Now I'll show you how to do that. So I've cut off the top of my pattern just to make it easier to hold and show you what I'm talking about. This is the yoga waistband. This will be the top of my pattern. Notice that I have not cut out my pattern in its entirety yet. I did trim these edges up kind of close to where I'm going to be working because it just makes it easier when I fold it, and I'll show you what I mean later. But I don't want to cut my pattern out yet, especially if you're decreasing the rise, because you're gonna have to tape paper back to redraw your line. And I've already got the paper there. So don't cut your pattern out yet. So as you've probably guessed, it's not as simple as just cutting 1 1/3 inches off the top of this pattern piece, because I need to think about the shape of my hip. I need to try to maintain that. So what I did is I measured down from the top X number of inches, and I just picked an arbitrary spot along the hip. You wouldn't want it to be in the crotch curve, and like I said, you can't just take off the top. But I drew a line that is parallel to the grain line. I measured down 1 1/3 inches, and I drew another line. Now, if these were dress pants that I was working on, I would probably have divided this up into 2 segments to try to maintain this line on the outside just a little bit better. But these are going to be pajama pants. So I feel okay with taking 1 1/3 inches, but generally I don't take more than 1 inch in any one area. So I'm going to draw these lines on the back of my pattern, on my back pattern piece, measuring down this same distance from this top outside seam point right here. If I were to divide the 1 1/3 inches into smaller pieces, I would do equal segments like this. Now that I have marked the same markings on my back piece, it's time to actually remove this height. So I fold the bottom line, and it is easier to fold if you use a ballpoint pen of some kind. It actually scores it a little bit. I fold the bottom line up to the top line and tape it down. Okay, MK, that's good and well, but what do I do about these little jogs right here? You take your, where's my French curve? You'll take your French curve and just kind of use a best fit here to smooth out this transition. Here, it's almost straight. I sound like a frog just then, didn't I? What is going on with me? So, this is my new cut line here. And over here, this is my new cut line. So I am in actuality probably taking off too much width. Let's redraw that. Smooth it out just a little. There we go. I like that better. This is my new cut line here now. What about us tall girls, you ask? Well, your calculations are going to be slightly different. We have the same rise on our pattern piece, and I assume the wearer's rise is 26.5. I just arbitrarily picked that. I'm going to have to subtract the actual rise from the wearer's rise instead of the other way around. Take out my seam allowances, divide it by 2, and I come up with 0.687. Well, that's in between 3/8 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch. It's closer to 3/4 of an inch, so that's what I decided to go with. I'm going to remove 3/4 of an inch from both the front and back pattern pieces. So I've still, just like I did to shorten my rise, I have still drawn a line right around the hip that is the same distance on both the front and back piece from this outside seam. And I only drew one line. cut that in half at that point. Take a piece of scrap paper, butt the flat edge up against your cut pattern piece. Take your straight edge, measure 3/4 of an inch up from there. Take your pattern piece, place it 3/4 of an inch up along the other edge of the straight edge. Now you will, oops, slipped. Tape your pattern pieces down. Put one more piece on there. And just like we did when we shortened, you will need to straighten these edges out a little here. So that's pretty simple. I hope you enjoy, and I can't wait to see what you make.